for coming tonight. Tonight is quite a special and rather kind of emotional occasion. In fact, a colleague of ours, Lionel Sims, long-term colleague of ours, died just under 1 year ago. And we're here with a panel of colleagues who worked in the area that Lionel kind of made his own and really helped to develop, area of skyscape archaeology or archaeoastronomy, which you're going to be hearing a lot more of tonight. Lionel did some extraordinary work in relation to the Neolithic megalithic monuments like Stonehenge and Avebury. And Lionel was also hugely influential in the setting up the anthropology program. Well, he set up the anthropology program at University of East London, where at least 2 or 3 of us were teaching. So I'm going to, where's the actual book? Let me wave, but well, we can see, it's all right. We've got it in virtual. Thanks, Fabio. Fabio, who's here and present, and Liz Henty, who's with us on the Zoom, are going to direct the proceedings and take it on from here. But they are the editors, the co-founders and co-editors of the Journal of Skyscape Archaeology. And they've edited this extraordinary volume called Solarizing the Moon, Essays in Honour of Lionel Sims, our colleague. So I'm going to leave it to Fabio, who's here with us, to direct the proceedings. And we're going to have the...
Thank you, Camilla. Want to sit down?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Okay, welcome everyone. As Camilla said, it's going to be a slightly different night for you guys if you tend to come to RAG here, either physically or on Zoom, because we are actually trying to more celebrate Lionel Sims and his research and his work and his influence in the field of skyscape archaeology. So what we're going to do, instead of just talking to you about what the great things Lionel has done, there will be a little bit of that. But we're going to make this a little bit less formal. So feel free to interrupt us and ask questions at any moment in time, either here or on Zoom. But the program, the overarching structure, is that we're going to hear from these guys that worked very closely with Lionel at UEL, particularly about Lionel's early days, how he got started in anthropology at UEL, and how he got into archaeoastronomy in the first place, how he got to be interested in places like Stonehenge and how it relates to the sun and the moon. And then Liz, who is at home in Scotland, is going to talk to us about what Lionel did in archaeoastronomy, the influence he had in the field, how he was trying to push the field forward, basically. Liz, who co-edited the book with me, as Camilla said, is an expert in the history of archaeoastronomy. So she's playing to that strength. And then I'll talk a little bit about Lionel's theories and Lionel's other contributions to the field. After that, we will basically open this up to the contributors to the volume, some of which are here physically, others are on Zoom, to talk about not only how Lionel influenced them, but also talk about their chapter in the book, which reflects that Lionel has had in our research. I should say our, because I'm also there. So that's the program. And I think I'm just going to leave it to you guys now to start, kick things off. And you can play it however you want. If you want to do it one at a time, or if you want to have a go, all 3 of you, it's up to you.
Yep. Chris, do you want to start? Let's start the story.
Okay. So I finished my PhD here in 1987. And it was a reconsideration of the mythologique of Claude Lévi-Strauss. So Claude Lévi-Strauss wrote these 4 volumes, studied the science of mythology, and came up with the conclusion that all the world's magical myths and fairy tales, in the end, amount to one myth only. And okay, the radical anthropology group's been going for a very long time, since 1978, And in 1988, just after I'd finished that PhD, which I've just mentioned, okay, how do I put this? My sister got fed up with her current boyfriend and put an advert in City Limit, which is a kind of early version of Time Out, looking for a new partner. Those are, of course, the days before dating apps and doing everything digitally. And it so happened that a person called Lionel Sims saw this ad, and he said he was good at tennis or something like that. And anyway, they got together, and very soon after that, my sister and this fella called Lionel came to where I was living in Lewisham. And one of the things my sister had said to Lionel was, Lionel had mentioned, he was a member of the Socialist Workers' Party, but he was particularly interested in the world historic defeat of the female sex. That concept is, of course, many will know this, the concept expressed in a book by Frederick Engels, the co-founder of Marxism, along with his friend Karl, the origin of the family, private property, and the state. And I think my sister, soon after meeting up with Lionel, they turned out to be not so interested in tennis or billiards or whatever they had in their ads, but Lionel told my sister he was interested in this topic. And anyway, my sister said, I've got a mad brother who's interested in those topics. And Lionel was kind of interested and decided to meet Liz's mad brother. So anyway, Lionel and my sister came round to my place, and I gave Lionel a copy of my PhD. And about 2 weeks later, Lionel came back together with my sister and told me that my thesis was rubbish. In particular, it was idealist. It was all about myths, and I should understand as a Marxist that ideas don't determine history. History is determined by material processes. And I sort of said to Lionel, well, perhaps you could read the thesis again. Not sure you've read it properly. Anyway, so Lionel went off and at this time read it properly and came back in another 2 weeks. And he was completely bowled over with my theory, which some of you will know if you've been coming to RAG before, which is that originally humanity became this cooperative species that we are through an event which I called the human revolution. And to cut a very long story short, the human revolution was based on solidarity, but particularly the solidarity of women through the capacity to synchronize menstrual cycles in harmony with the moon. And a very, very strange theory, obviously. I mean, very strange to have a theory which has anything to do with menstruation, and the moon immediately conjures up ideas of moonshine and all sorts of problematic things. But Lionel, being, thought of this thesis, from his point of view, the brilliant thing about it was that it was an up-to-date corroboration of the basic theory, the sort of basic anthropological theory central to Marxism itself, which was that once upon a time, women kind of ruled the world, and then there was this counter-revolution, which Engels described as the world historic defeat of the female sex. And in my PhD, I'd sort of suggested that was something to do with the period when the basic rhythms of life were governed by the moon, and then when women were defeated by the patriarchal takeover, there was a shift to the sun. How long should I go on for? 2 or 3 more minutes?
Yeah, go on.
So every year in the Radical Anthropology Group had been going for about 10 years then, and every year we used to go down, all of us, to Avebury for a day, for a trip with the children, all our children. Avebury, does everyone know what I mean by Avebury Stone Circle? It's the biggest stone circle in Europe, far more beautiful and grand and impressive than Stonehenge. A wonderful time to, a wonderful venue, huge stone circle, a little village in the middle, and a huge hill, the biggest man-made hill in Europe, Silver Hill, close by. We just went there. I actually came to know about it in the 70s. I was in Feuer's bookshop and I saw this book by a guy called Michael Dames called The Silbury Treasure. And I got it, and it was full of folklore, pictures of corn dollies and various items of folklore, and it tried to sort of make vague sense of Avebury. And another book he wrote, Michael Dames, who was I don't know what exactly Michael James was. He wasn't really a professional in these areas, but he wrote a book with lots of illustrations. And so that encouraged me to think, oh, how about I go down with my kids and my friends' kids in the group called the Radical Anthropology Group, to this place called Avebury, and I was just blown over. And from then on, every year, we'd all go down to Avebury for a picnic, hired a coach, 30, 40 of us. We used to climb up the side of Silbury Hill with our kids and roll down. So anyway, so when Lionel met up with me and decided that what I'd written was a confirmation of Engels, his work, he came to Avebury, and of course Lionel and others said, "Chris, what is this all about? What is Avebury Stone Circle about? What is this huge hill doing?" And I used to sort of say, well, something to do with the sun, the moon, matriarchy, patriarchy, but honestly, I haven't time to go into it all. I'm still interested in other things. And so that was part of the story. So Lionel was impressed with this beautiful thing, and he started taking on the job during these visits of trying to sort of vaguely explain what was going on at Avebury Stone Circle, relying mostly on Michael James's book, which between you and me is kind of nonsense. The book is nice nonsense, but it's kind of mostly nonsense. And then over the years, I've cut the story much shorter now because I need to finish this little introduction. I think it must have been about 2003, 2004, quite a long time afterwards. Each year when we went to Avebury, Lionel would talk about the stones and everything else. And I used to be, come on, Lionel, you can't just keep talking about these, I don't know, marriages between the women and the men, and the sort of, I don't know, the coming together here, and they went down this avenue, they came up this avenue. There was no evidence for any of these things. And Lionel was getting a little bit tetchy with me, saying, Chris, come on, I'm doing my best. And so there's a little bit of pressure on Lionel because he had to give this talk every year to sort of really start finding out about things. And that he did. And I think it was about 2003, 4, something like that. I think I'm right, I may have got the date slightly wrong, when really Lionel suddenly, obviously a lot of work went into it, kind of cracked it. He cracked the problems fundamentally with Stonehenge, and then applied the same sort of insights to Avebury Stone Circle and Silbury Hill. And you're going to hear quite a lot about it, because what he kind of based on my thesis and then my book, which came out in 1992, Lionel realized that if I was right, what happened in history was a switch over from fundamentally gender egalitarian social system where women had a lot of solidarity and power when they were hunter-gatherers, egalitarian hunter-gatherers, and then, cutting a long story short, being massively oversimplified, came cattle herding and farming, and that led to a transition from using the moon as a clock to the sun as a clock. And don't forget that when the moon was your fundamental clock, the fidelity to the moon was much more than just an interesting thing. Oh, look, the moon up there, it's doing things, it's waxing and waning. It was actually fundamental to the sort of deepest belief system, call it religion if you like, but religion, again, is not quite the right word, of hunter-gatherers. And to switch over from that cosmology, that religion, with faithfulness to the moon, to switching over to the sun must have been a very tricky, dangerous, difficult transition. And what Lionel realized was that in order to make that transition easier, to make it less likely to end in calamity, disruption, social collapse, if only by that stage, the men, the male shamans, ritual leaders, incipient priesthood, if they found a way of kind of arguing through the stones, the way the stones are aligned, that actually there's no transition, we're still maintaining fidelity to the old ways, we're still faithful to the moon, because actually the sun is a version of the moon. Okay, this is what Solarizing the Moon is all about. It's the title of the book. If Lionel's argument was that Stonehenge is designed to create this extraordinary illusion that the sun actually is the moon, because it does the things that the moon does, but on a different tempo, in a different way. And by making that claim, the patriarchal founders, whatever was going on in Wiltshire, succeeded in stabilizing society, stabilizing the transition. That turned out to be a genius concept, which not only sort of explained the sort of general process which had happened, this shift from one religion to another, but also even managed to explain some of the most intricate details of Stonehenge and Silver Hill and Avebury in a way which was quite extraordinary, where Lionel could actually make predictions about what you'd expect to find with the alignments and the little slots at Stonehenge through which the sun and the moon appear or don't appear. He was actually able to make predictions about what you should find, and then, okay, experimentally, let's walk around the place, see whether that turns out true. And again and again and again, amazing, the theory seemed to work. So from my point of view, and I think from many of us that contributed to this book, Lionel did this amazing thing, which is to crack Stonehenge and crack Avebury Hill, Stone Circle and Silver Hill, a huge conundrum that archaeologists have faced for many years, many decades, really produce an intellectually satisfying explanation as to why those stones were built, and in particular, why they were built in the particular way that they were built. So that's it. Or Ian should tell another version of the story of meeting up with Lionel.
I must have met Lionel just after his second visit to Chris's house, when he'd read the thesis properly. But I met him just over the road from here. It's in June '88, at a Socialist Workers' Party summer school. I'd gone there because the next door neighbor's boyfriend had said he happened to be a former student of Lionel's in sociology. Lionel's background was actually sociology, not anthropology, at Northeast London Polytechnic. He said, "Oh, I've got this mate who's going to be talking about Engels and the origins of the family," you know, knowing that I was interested in these things. I said, "Oh, I know all this. It's going to just be a rehash. I'll go along anyway." And I was blown away. I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. It suddenly made sense of all kinds of questions that I had. And I sort of, to put this into context, I was sort of 8 months into a do-it-yourself diploma, 2-year diploma program, where you design your own research program, find someone to supervise it, and away you go. And I've been interested in this debate that Marxists and feminists have been having in the 70s about human origins and gender relations, much like Chris had, but from a different generation. And this had been a sort of incomplete debate. It had just been abandoned in the 70s, late 70s. And so I thought an orthodox anthropology or archaeology degree wasn't going to answer these questions. And that's why I went to the Polytechnic, where you could design your own course. Now, as it turned out, Lionel was a lecturer in sociology at the same Polytechnic. So I could ask him to supervise me. So I went to him after the talk and said, "You know, will you do this?" He said, "No. Go away and read. First of all, read Chris's thesis, and then read Robin Dunbar's Primate Social Systems. And then come back to me at the end of the summer." So I did that, and it changed the course of my life, quite literally. I persuaded Lionel to take over the supervision, and for the next 2 years, he did his best to try and knock me into shape as a potential academic. And to give it a bit more context, I've been influenced by the sort of feminist literature, which had paid a lot of attention to early farmers in the Near East and the Balkans. People like Marija Gimbutas, and also a guy, no feminist at all, he had no politics particularly, a guy called James Mellart, who'd excavated a site in Anatolia called Çatalhöyük, which turned out to be amazing.
in terms of symbolic culture. This is one of the earliest farming sites in the world, and it's full of these, goddess-like figures with animals either side, and vultures coming out of the walls, and murals all over the walls, and burial patterns under the floor, under their sleeping areas, suggesting that this was a matrilocal society. So this was all fascinating, and I spent most of the time in the library in Ankara just reading, because I knew nothing about archaeology. And the one thing that struck me reading all these reports was that there seemed to be an incredible lot of these female burials with red ochre. So I come back, I just spent 7 weeks there. I came back to London, and that's when I heard Lionel's talk, which was on Chris's model. And it suddenly all fell into place. It answered sort of the specifics of what I'd been looking at, but placing it in a sort of grand theory narrative. Now, Lionel had also, from his student days, been interested in, early farming and the formation of the state. And so it was kind of along those lines that we sort of worked out what I was going to do over the next 2 years. But because it was a model of origins, you've got to put this into the context of what was happening in the late 80s. The whole field of human origins was turned upside down. People had been thinking, oh, you can go back 2 million years. You've got Homo erectus in China and Java and in Africa, and so multi-regional evolution. So there's nothing you can say about symbolic culture that the time depths, you can't, it's not even a question worth asking about meaningful commonalities in symbolic culture, because we have a multi-regional origin. Suddenly in 1987, Rebecca Cann published this analysis of mitochondrial DNA showing that all the world's women had a last common ancestress in Africa around 200,000 years ago. It suddenly collapsed the time scale by an order of magnitude. And the following year, in '88, you got these new dates from 2 sites in Israel. They were early burials with grave goods, animal parts, shkul and kafsa. And they presumed that they were sort of 40, 50,000, and that this was some of the earliest evidence for symbolic culture, which was that, absolutely, slightly earlier than the Upper Paleolithic in Europe, but like it could be accommodated within that kind of framework. There was no evidence for symbolic culture predating 40,000, as far as everyone was concerned. These new dates pushed it back to 100,000. And they're right on the doorstep of Africa. And you've just discovered that our species had just evolved in Africa, and that hadn't left Africa until much later. At the time, it was thought maybe 50,000, but like 100,000 because of these shkul and kafsa sites. So obviously, in terms of using this model and these 2 new findings, symbolic culture should have been in place in Africa before migration beyond the continent. So we knew that that's what we should expect to find. And I spent the next sort of 30 years trying to show that, largely through the record of red ochre use. But we'd always, Lionel was always keen on emphasizing the material basis. So it's all very well doing what you can with red ochre, but what about collective big game hunting? You've got a model here predicting that this should be a sort of leading up to full moon. 3 years after I'd met him, we happened to go to an academic conference, 91 this was, and we heard an American who'd been working with the Hadza. The Hadza are a small group of hunter-gatherers in Tanzania, Kristen Hawkes, and she was looking at their hunting strategies, and she was trying to evaluate whether feeding a nuclear family was actually what they were doing. But what their analyses had shown was that by far their most productive form of hunting was lunar phase locked in the dry season animals would come to drink at the few remaining waterholes and do a lot of their drinking at night. And so Hadza men would position themselves around these waterholes. And it was like 3-4 times more productive than most other either scavenging or daytime pursuit hunting.
Blinds.
From hunting blinds, yeah. And we already knew from the work of James Woodburn that the Hadza's most important ritual was a dark moon ritual, and that one of its functions was to help ensure the success of forthcoming hunting. So Lionel, you know, we were all there, and we were sort of blown away. Like, this was not something that the model was predicting. It wasn't predicting that any extant society should approximate these initial conditions that the model had been positing. But we were all doing different things, and they were just too thin on the ground. We couldn't pursue the nightstand hunting idea, really. Now, I was pursuing the Ochre record. Camilla was getting stuck into her doctoral thesis, as was I. Lionel was just getting the anthropology program at UEL off the ground. So we sort of just let it sit there for about, I don't know, a dozen years or so, until Camilla got a student, Eleanor Mariki, Camilla had already been out to visit the Hadza, and persuaded Eleanor this would be a good fieldwork site. And me and Eleanor were a couple, are still a couple, and so she let me tag along. And, you know, I wasn't doing any research. I have no language skills whatsoever. I didn't speak Swahili, let alone, and like everyone else, no one speaks Hadzane apart from Woodburn. And he's now dead. So I didn't think I was going to be doing anything. I could just observe. But one day, a couple of guys said, "Do you want to come along? We're going hunting tonight." And they invited me to come nightstand hunting. And that was an amazing experience. Partly just looking at it as an archaeologist, you know, realizing that the blind I slept in that night was like sort of slightly dug into the ground with some sort of bushes in front of it and a tree behind, so that when you stood up, you didn't present a sort of solid silhouette. It wouldn't be noticed, really. It's just in the shadows. And the profile, it wasn't deep, but like, say, that much below the ground, you could see lithic artifacts in the profile. And just 20 meters further back, there was a quartz vein which had clearly been worked as a source of raw material. There was a sharpening stone, and suddenly realized these sites, these kinds of sites, have been used for hundreds of thousands of years. You know, as long as the water's still flowing, people would have been going there every dry season. So shortly afterwards, Lionel decided to organize a session at TAG in Sheffield, Theoretical Archaeology Group. And he organized a session around the moon. I'd just come back from Tanzania, and he asked me to throw together a short paper, which was largely sort of just, you know, just had a bit of background research and sort of explaining why this was significant and so on. But again, didn't take it anywhere. And still obsessed with other subjects, the Ochre record. And it was only when Fabio presented the idea of compiling this volume of work dedicated to Lionel and you know, on related themes, so I thought, fuck, if we don't do it now, we'll never get this done. So my contribution was on nightstand hunting. And I think we've cracked it. Like, we can actually show that this was highly relevant, just as relevant as the pigment record, to our speciation in Africa. But we can come back to that.
Just say,
later.
just say about the dry season being a pinch point. But I mean, just say a little bit about how it turned around.
Yeah. Well, you have to put this into some context. So, like, if we're talking about speciation, it's the last period of brain size increase. And the thing about any brain size increase in the whole of the evolution of Homo is that that places greater burdens, energetic burdens on mothers. So they need equally the whole story is how do they harness more energy from others? And initially, those others are presumed to be their close female kin, but eventually they need more regular investment from men. And so this is where Chris's sex stripe model should kick in. In Africa, in African grasslands and savannas, the dry season is a period of relative scarcity, sometimes absolute scarcity. I mean, there are large chunks of the Kalahari that you can barely get by there, even with modern hunter-gatherer technology, let alone they just wouldn't have been inhabitable in the Middle Stone Age. There are very few tubers left, and they're hard to find because the leaves have gone, the honey's gone, the berries have gone. You're reliant on animal fat. And it's the fat that's critical, because in the you need either fat or carbohydrates. You can be surrounded by meat, and if you don't have fat or carbohydrates, you'll die of starvation. It's called rabbit starvation. So female, and now in terms of our speciation, it looks as if brain size increase, the speciation is between roughly 150 and 350,000 years ago. Brain size increase continued throughout that. And now whether it was gradual or stepped, we still don't know. We haven't got enough fossils, but that means the selection pressures on mothers to harness yet more energy from males would still have been applying. And looking at hunting technology in terms of spears, it looks as if although early thrusting spears may go back 500,000, spears that you could throw 5 to 10 meters, they don't really begin to develop until about 200,000 years ago. And that's the thing about nightstand hunting. Your hunting blind is very close to the game trails that the animals use to approach the water. So you can be within just a few meters of them. So if it's that important to the Hadza today, imagine how much more important it would have been before the bow and arrow. Hadza bow is accurate to about 50 meters. But like once you had a spear that you could accurately throw up to 10 meters or so, then suddenly this form of hunting would play an absolutely critical role in turning, and what the Hadza have done is turn a period of relative scarcity into one of absolute abundance. That's when women have their highest body fat ratios, even though there are no berries, no honey, not so many tubers, so on.
Great.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Ian. I'll try and really be very brief because I think we've taken too much time here. But I came along a year or so later after Ian had linked up with Lionel, came to RAG, was reading the drafts of Chris's book and heard about the sex stripe theory. I too, like Ian, was particularly interested in the intersection of feminist ideas with Marxist ideas. And so Engels was always the place I went, the origins of the family. What we should say, because it hasn't really been brought out, is that Lionel was the most extraordinary teacher. He was the most charismatic speaker. He was he could explain complicated ideas and make everybody feel beautifully intelligent, able to understand those ideas. And he was a brilliant teacher. He was working at UEL as a sociologist at that stage. I first heard Lionel talking about Engels, having worked out the modern version, understanding the modern version of Engels, how it would work in terms of modern anthropology, primate social systems, new work on primatology by Robin Dunbar, Chris's thesis on the sex strike and how women's coalitions would have operated. Both with Lionel, I came here because I'd been inspired by all that to do anthropology, to do a master's anthropology here at UCL. Ian was just starting his PhD here at UCL, so Lionel was with me on the same program. He was transforming himself from a sociologist into an anthropologist because he really wanted to open up an anthropology program at University of East London. Now, University of East London was just a new university changing from the old polytechnics of East London, North East London Polytechnic. So it was like the bottom of the table of the new universities. And he had this ambition to create an anthropology program as good as Oxford and Cambridge for all the students that came, the most diverse, the most working class, the most proletarian university on anywhere in this country, almost anywhere. This lab, this seminar room is named after Darrell Ford, who is the head of anthropology at UCL early in the 50s, 60s, great anthropologist, very stuck into what's known as structural functionalism. Darrell Ford's recommendation of policy was that anthropology was the kind of elite subject that should only really be studied at postgraduate level for Russell Group, you know, the elite universities. The other universities should have, they weren't ready for anthropology. So Lionel's idea of the anthropology program made accessible to the widest constituencies of students, students who'd been told at school that they were just, you know, they just weren't good enough for university, students who'd been single mums and had become, you know, in late 30s or 40s, started to want to study, or students with this kind of background. And he wanted to create that degree. And he just looked around him, and at University of East London, there was a whole collection of people who were anthropologists, again, diverse collection, Jane Ifig-Nugwe, background of Igbo, anthropologist, Arndt Schneider, Paul Valentine, and several others. They'd been teaching other subjects. And he just realized he had all this team of anthropologists that he could pull together into an anthropology program. And what he wanted of that anthropology program, quite distinct from you know, the standard in the old universities of Britain, that you have biological anthropology over there, social anthropology over there, and they never talk to each other. Archaeology maybe might talk to a little bit. They never talk to each other. And I know, I've been here and I know what it's like. For UEL, it would be like a four-field, like an American approach. You'd have biological evolution, you'd have social and cultural anthropology, you'd have linguistics, you'd have archaeology, and you'd have all this, including, importantly, for the archaeology, as he built it, courses on archaeoastronomy. One of the most famous courses at UEL, which became a jewel in the crown of a program, which was the jewel in the crown at University of East London, Decoding Stonehenge, where he rigorously took these students who'd been told at school they were too stupid, he took them through to first-class degrees by studying the intricate ins and outs of every stone at Stonehenge. And it was just, and it totally inspiring for those students. Meanwhile, it's taking them every year to like Avebury, to Stonehenge, to go and actually look and walk around those sites and learn from the ground on those sites and develop. And meanwhile, his research developing, cutting edge research developing. So I think that's enough. A bit beyond, of course, Chris got brought into that anthropology program, becoming a professor of anthropology at University of East London. As I was doing my research here as a doctoral student, Lionel also invited me to teach at UEL. And it was really, I should say that I'd never forget that Lionel's support while I was doing a thesis, but also starting teaching. I was beginning lecturer at UEL. Enormous support that, you know, I couldn't have done both of those things without his support. His own work came later because he put so much effort into organizing that anthropology program at UEL. You know, fantastic, all singing and all dancing anthropology program with fantastic field trips and so forth. And his own research came, his own PhD came later when he had the sort of burden of all that administration lifted off him. But I think that's probably enough. We've told the story and we should go back to the program.
Yeah, thanks for that, guys. That was really insightful. To speak for myself, I had no idea of how you, all three of you, all four of you with Lionel, kind of came together. So that was really amazing. Liz, do you want to take it from there?
I'll try. I hope there's not too many overlaps between what has gone before and what's coming next, but I will do my best. So yeah, I just have to say it's been a huge honor and is that okay?
Hold on, give me a second.
Oh.
And go on, Liz.
Yeah, it's been a huge honor and a privilege to co-edit Solarizing the Moon in honor of Lionel, who was such a groundbreaking figure in the field of archaeoastronomy. I mean, which really came after his sort of, well, not that he ever stopped being an anthropologist, but his focus shifted once he got interested in prehistoric monuments. And the fact that we had so many contributions to the book underlines how well liked and respected he was. One of the things that I remember most about him is that he was such a charismatic figure in front of an audience, despite, maybe partly because of or despite his controversial views. And one of the book's contributors, Amelia Pastor, who can't be here tonight, told us that she would miss his talks, and here I quote, because I don't think it can be put better than this, his talks were delivered at the speed of light when he fought with the time allowed for presentations. Outwardly he was charming, but he was no stranger to disagreements from his audience. But on the surface, it didn't seem to bother him. After one heated panel group, which was the first time I met him, he told me that he was well used to criticism, but clearly refused to take any other stance than his own. For example, he took his ideas to the what's been mentioned earlier, and Chris, I don't know if you were at the 2005 or the 2007 theoretical archaeology conference. His session was Reconstructing the Underworld, the Anthropology and Archaeology of Other Worlds. And there his version of archaeoastronomy was attacked by a leading archaeologist. And it's taken them quite a long time to come round to his ideas. Similarly, an early version of his publication on the solarization of the moon at Stonehenge was rejected by the then Cambridge Archaeology Journal editor. However, after Lionel's National Geographic film on Stonehenge was broadcast worldwide, it was subsequently accepted. One of the things which Camilla's touched on was that he was passionate about education and innovative in this respect, in that he introduced archaeoastronomy as an optional module on UEL's anthropology BSc degree program. And this was in 1993, 8 years after Clive Ruggles put archaeoastronomy on the university curriculum via archaeology. So they were sort of like almost in complete opposition. Lionel's course, entitled Decoding Stonehenge, ran until 2011. And the course was, as its title suggests, a a new examination of Britain's iconic monument, though it included Avebury and monuments at Bruna Boyne and Loch Crew in Ireland. Unlike Gerald Hawkins' 1960 book, from which the course title derived, Lionel didn't focus solely on the astronomical alignments, but attempted to examine how archaeoastronomy could deal with cultural complexity. So the course was more focused on understanding the needs which drove a culture to enshrine alignments in their monuments, rather than on the methods of finding them. He believed that by exploring single sites such as Stonehenge, new insights could be found. And in this respect, his research was meticulous. You know, he visited them over and over again. He worked out the height of a Neolithic person to see what they could see over palisades or whatever, and tailored his solutions to what could have been achieved by the builders. And so by exploring single sites such as Stonehenge, new insights could be found. And more importantly, his approach was informed by landscape phenomenology, and the module essay title, Evaluate Neolithic Revolution Theory using the theory of lunar solar conflation, encapsulates the anthropological nature of this module. Overall, the content of Lionel's course, being an innovative combination of theories and methodologies founded in other disciplines, enabled the humanitarian societal analysis missing from normal archaeoastronomy research. It was because he approached the material from an interdisciplinary perspective, combining a number of methodologies and approaches. His practice revolved around an anthropological critique of 5 disciplines: archaeoastronomy, archaeology, behavioral ecology or sociobiology, Indo-European poetics and cultural anthropology. And key texts from these were part of the reading material. He drew on theories from those disciplines to model the likely scenarios for late Neolithic monument building cultures, and to argue for a new approach to prehistoric monuments, which could shed light on similar sites of the period. In his own words, his practice included archaeoastronomy as part of the American definition of anthropology, which integrates biological, social, cultural anthropology with archaeology, linguistics, myth, and folklore. I mean, archaeoastronomers had never seen anything like it. There they were with their theodolites and clinometers going out measuring stuff with very little consideration of the cultures, apart from how they interpreted them from the measurements that they'd found, which, you know, it's a top to tail way of doing things, really. Anyway, Lionel continued his educational output out with the university campus by chairing the educational subcommittee for the European Society for Astronomy and Culture, and through his briefings showed his commitment to education, outreach, and cross-disciplinary fertilization. However, he told me at the time that its educational initiatives have so far been stillborn, since no consensus exists on method or models. And I'm afraid that continues today. However, he helped out wherever he could. And I echo Camilla here by saying that when I was researching my PhD, he answered all my questions, whether substantial or trivial, with grace and good humor, and I will be ever grateful for the insights that he shared. as we've heard earlier, Lionel's archaeoastronomy was rooted in anthropology. So he was able to bring a perspective that had not been considered previously. So to sum up, using a combination of phenomenology, archaeology, and archaeoastronomical techniques for single sites, Lionel gave us an important perspective on many of the iconic sites in Britain. Indeed, his work could be seen as a forerunner to a broader approach, which Fabio and I have called skyscape archaeology. In this respect, Lionel spoke of a less restricted definition of landscape, which includes skyscapes, suggesting in 2009 that weaknesses in both archaeoastronomy and landscape archaeology can be overcome by their combination. And he cited Tilley's phenomenological approach as a guide. With no hesitation, we invited him to join the editorial board of the Journal of Skyscape Archaeology at its inauguration in 2015. His 2016 forum piece, "What is the Minor Standstill of the Moon?" has received the largest number of downloads to date, far outstripping all the others. We miss him terribly, but feel fortunate to have known him and are really grateful for the legacy of really groundbreaking papers that he published, which, you know, will be taught in courses all around the world. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Liz. I'm a bit mindful of time, so I'm just going to press on, and if anyone has any questions, you can ask us towards the end. I'm just going to remove the pin and share the screen again. So perfect. So what I'm going to do is kind of very briefly summarize some of Lionel's key contributions to the field. I mean, Liz has mentioned a lot of them. Chris has summarized Lionel's theory very well. I'm not going to retread that, but I'm going to talk about some other contributions. One of the key things Lionel has engaged, one of the keys that allowed him to decode Stonehenge and Avery was his understanding of the lunar standstills. So I want to just briefly, I'm going to try to briefly explain what a lunar standstill is. If we look at the point of the compass and you track the position of sunrise and sunset throughout the year, you know, the sun doesn't, first of all, let's break down some myths. The sun doesn't rise and set in the same position every day in the year. These are the positions of sunrise. This is from Stonehenge, which is a key site for Lionel. So the sun will actually rise somewhere around northeast. It's not exactly northeast in the summer solstice, and it will rise around southeast in the winter solstice. And of course, in between, it's going to be moving between these 2 points. And of course, it sets on the other side. The key point here is that there's a limit to the range of motion of sunrise and sunset. That limit changes from location to location, but it's constrained. When you look at what the moon does over a period of a year, on a given year, these are the extremes, moonrise and moonset, that the moon can do on a particular year. This is the northern and this is the southern extreme. So it's similar to the sun. But the thing is, the moon is more complicated. Whereas the sun will always have the same extremes within one's lifetime, the moon actually changes. It can be like this on a given year, and then roughly 9 years later, it will look, oh, sorry, that's, let me backtrack a bit. This is compared to the sun. So the yellow is the sun, the red is the moon. This means the moon can rise in places farther north or further south than the sun does. And that's believed to be a key aspect of what lunar standstill is, but I'll come back to that in a second. The point I want to make now is that this happens on a particular year, but then 9 years later, this is what the moon does. It's a much shorter range. This is the minor standstill or the minor extreme. The red range is a major standstill or a major extreme. So the moon not only does this, but those limits also change with a period of about 18 years. So every 9 years or so, it's going to move from a minor to a major and then back to a minor. This gives you key points on the horizon that you can try to orient your megalithic monuments to in order to capture the moon as well as the sun at these particular turning points in their journey. Now, standstills, lunar standstills, is not something that we've known from Greek astronomy, which is where we inherit most of our astronomy for. It's more recent than that. Alexander Thom, who walked around Britain measuring megalithic monuments in the 60s and 70s, was one of the first people to actually notice these things and realize that some of these monuments seem to be aligned to lunar standstills. But the idea of standstills was always based on the major extreme, that this is important because it's a time at which the moon is rising or setting in a location the sun can never reach. Lionel turned that around. He provided a different way of thinking about lunar standstills. And it's heavily based on this. This is a sample of the moons that you're going to get closest to that extreme position, the northern and the southern one, at a major standstill year, in this case, 1969, which was the year of a major standstill. So the moon is going to have that wide range that was in red. And these are the moons that are going to be at that range. So every month you have a moon like that, but it's going to be in different phase. And what Lionel observed here is that there's a coincidence between dark moon and, this is roughly June 15th, so it's roughly summer solstice, and full moon around December 23rd, so winter solstice. So on a major standstill year, you have dark moon on summer solstice and full moon on winter solstice, right? And this alignment needs to be on the northern half of the sky. It doesn't work on the south. This is the southern extreme, this is the northern extreme. 9 years later, on a minor standstill, 1978, similar pattern with the phases, but look what happens. You have a full moon on summer solstice, and you have a dark moon on winter solstice. Darkest, longest night just became darker because the moon is not there. And the shortest night, the longest day, just became brighter because actually when the sun sets, it's a full moon that's coming out. And Lionel believed this was the key feature of standstills. It has nothing to do with where the moon is on the horizon. It has to do with the fact that you synchronize the motions of the moon and the sun by having a full moon, yes, on summer solstice and a dark moon on winter solstice. Why was this important for Lionel? Why was this such a big feature? Because that's the key that unlocks Stonehenge. At Stonehenge, when you're coming in, I'm sorry I don't have a photo of that. It's very difficult to find. When you're coming in from the avenue and you're just entering the circle, not the circle of stones, but the henge itself. If all the stones were still there, which they're not, by the way, you would be facing a wall of stone. All the gaps you see in there, most of the gaps you see there would be covered by stones on the other side of the circle, except for two windows right at the center, one at the bottom and one at the top. So one here and the other one kind of like this horizontal bar. The one in the bottom is exactly where the sun sets on winter solstice. And that's what you can still see today. If you go to Stonehenge, not today, obviously, but on the winter solstice, if you want to endure miserable Salisbury Plain, which is very cold, you will see that if the weather is nice enough. The window above that would capture the dark moon on a minor standstill year. So when you have the longest, darkest night, you will have the sun and the moon setting at these two windows of Stonehenge. And this is what Chris was talking about. It's that transformation between that Paleolithic lunar template where the moon would have been the key, the most important, the most magical, most powerful cosmological element, to what we know from later Bronze and Iron Age cultures. It's the sun, right? When you get to Indo-European mythology, the sun takes prime place, even though the moon is still there, obviously. I think Chris will and John will definitely touch on that. But what Lionel saw here is that this is the moment of transition. These megalithic monuments were the instrument to effect that transfer of power from the moon to the sun. That's why you need to capture both in the same place to be able to say, look, the sun is as powerful as the moon. Obviously, this is what, according to Lionel, the patriarchy in the Neolithic would be trying to sell with places like Stonehenge and Avebury. And that was the theory, right? But before I finish, and I promise this is my last slide, there was three other aspects of Lionel's research that I think that are key and that in many ways are as much a part of his legacy as the theory itself. One of them is that Lionel was always paid an incredible amount of attention to the archaeological detail of these sites, to a much higher degree than was the average within archaeoastronomy. A large percentage of archaeoastronomers, for most of archaeoastronomy's history, of course things are changing now, but for most of its history, involved people just going out into the countryside and measuring whatever stones were there without paying attention to archaeological reports of the excavation, if there was an excavation, you know, because some of the stones have been moved. They might not be in the right place. Lionel always paid attention to that level of detail. And if you saw Lionel's last lecture, which you hosted, was online, and it was on Silbury Hill, this artificial mound in Avebury, which is Europe's largest artificial mound. And it's prehistoric, it goes back to the Neolithic. The level of detail, even the stratigraphy of the site was part of Lionel's analysis and interpretation of that. It was incredible. It was always incredible to see that. The other thing was that he started to apply later. He started to become more systematic with it later, towards after his Avebury paper, was that he had an almost scientific interest in testing interpretations. So he would look at all the possible interpretations for a site, sometimes looking at the interpretations of multiple authors, and he would test them against the evidence, and he would knock them down until usually what would happen is that there would be one idea, or maybe a combination of different ideas, that would still fit the evidence. And that idea was usually related to the model that he had proposed, because the data fits that model. And the last one, Liz touched upon it, so I'm not going to spend too much on that, but it was his focus on the embodied experience at these sites, of actually walking the avenue at Avebury, of actually coming down to the eye level of a Neolithic person, because they were shorter than us, and feeling what happens if I'm walking around this landscape? What can I see and what can I not see? Yeah. That was a key ingredient in Lionel's interpretation of Avebury, is when can you see Silbury Hill, and when does it stop being visible? It's very difficult to do that just by working it out on your desk, looking at maps and plans and things like that. It's much more alive when you actually walk the field. And Lionel was always put that really at the top of importance. So that's it from me, really. I'm going to go back to the first slide. So what we want to do now is actually hear from the other people who contributed to the volume and who also have their own stories and their own inspirations from Lionel. So I think we're going to start with John because he's here in the room, and then we're going to move on to a couple of people that are with us on Zoom. Do you want to do that, John?
Yeah, no problem.
Excellent.
I'm not going to speak for long because I only met Lionel in, I think, 2016, by which time he was already a kind of, I'm tempted to use the word legend. Infamous, more famous, I would say. My research was on Indo-European mythology and the Milky Way, and researching the alignment of henges to see, looking for stellar alignments. And I kept on looking, when I was doing my literature review, I kept looking at papers that were similar to my ideas, and the name Sims kept on coming up. But whenever I mentioned him to my lecturers, there was a kind of, yeah, well, by all means read him, but take it, you know, there was a kind of, take it with a pinch of salt, the same way that they dealt with Maria Gimbutas, who you mentioned earlier, almost a mistrust there. So when I met him at the 2016 TAG conference, it was like meeting a pariah. It was like, who is this person? I didn't know what to expect. And when I gave my talk, I could,
Was this the one in South Africa?
yeah, so I could see this figure there at the front, kind of looking up at me. And a lot of the symbolism that I was mentioning was female symbolism to do with a certain asterism, the Southern Cross, and how this related to the womb of a goddess. And a lot of my friends were there. They were kind of sniggering at my uncomfortable descriptions of vulvas and rest in the sky. And I could see, well, afterwards, Lionel came up to me and he was saying these subjects that you were talking about, I know it's sort of embarrassing to talk about these things, but this is very Western point of view. And I could see there was a kind of fire in his eyes about the importance of these female symbols that I'd kind of glossed over. And meeting him, it made me approach his papers differently and to reread them. And I realized that he was an example of what I call in my chapter Chetham's Law, after a Professor Chetham who taught at Bournemouth, still teaches at Bournemouth, I think. And when I told him that by the time I finish my PhD, I'll be 50, and I was perhaps too old to do this, he said that there are two types of people who come up with new ideas: young people and old people, not people in the middle. He says, because young people have not been taught yet what not to think. People who've been in a career for long don't dare cross boundaries because they've been indoctrinated. Older people who come into a subject later on tend to come up with new ideas because they've been brought up in another discipline, and they tend to jump disciplines and see things which are blatantly obvious to them, but which have avoided the sight of people who have been studying for years. And this is why Lionel, who was a sociologist and anthropologist, could enter the archaeological field and completely blow out the water the old theories of Stonehenge and Avebury. He was able to see something there that wasn't obvious to the people who had been studying it for years. He was able to see what was unseen. In this case, dark moon, because you can't see the dark moon. You can't. And an archaeologist. Archaeology is based on finding things rather than ideas. You know, you find an artifact and you have to describe it and work out what it was and all this. Even archaeoastronomy is based on alignments of the sun, things you can see. The dark moon is something that you can't see. in the same way that when I studied the Milky Way was something that had been ignored by archaeoastronomers because most people haven't seen the Milky Way just because of modern lighting. So with the dark moon, this was the idea that something invisible could appear in a window at Stonehenge was something that archaeologists had just not looked at. But coming from the anthropological perspective, he knew that there was something there to see. And this is Lionel's genius. He's seeing the unseen, and he is also putting his feet on the ground and exploring these places from an experiential perspective. So he actually went to Avebury, and as Chris said, he's making himself the size of a Neolithic man. And what he's seeing is asking himself, what is being seen at Silbury, at Avebury? As you walk around the Avebury landscape, which is meant to be walked, how is Silbury appearing? And it is appearing as a moon. It's appearing as a moon where a moon shouldn't be. And this is because the moon is actually as it would appear if you were in the underworld. It's an initiation into a way of seeing the invisible. And this is his strength. The same way that he's saying what is appearing at Avebury is what's appearing in that window at Stonehenge. In the lead up to the appearance of the dark moon, or the non-appearance of the dark moon, one would see the moon flashing the wrong way, going the wrong way through its cycle, as if time was turning backwards. And it's that ability to see things differently that mark Lionel out, and that is his legacy. This is why most archaeologists kind of balk at his work as well, because they don't understand it. They need to step outside of archaeology, learn a bit more of anthropology, learn a bit more mythology, and to trust that. Mythology is kind of has been out of favor for the last 50 years for some stupid reason, but it's about time we brought it back in, and hopefully Lionel's work will be at the forefront of that.
Really good. Now, Michael, I know you're there somewhere. You want to unmute yourself?
Yes, I'm here. Okay. Oh, thank you to contribute to this memorial. I remember many discussions with Lionel, fierce and profound in substance, often controversial and approving, but always with joy, enthusiasm, and humor. When he lectures, his enthusiasm and commitment to the cause are felt. I remember very well the intense, sometimes heated discussions that the two of us used to have together with Rosalind Frank, also attending this memorial, at the lunch table at many SEAC conferences. We discussed menstruation, the course of the moon, the role of women in Paleolithic. It's my study, Paleolithic things and symbolism and myths and all these things, the cycles of life and death and much more. We were so absorbed in our discussions that we usually forgot to eat, and thus went to the following lectures mentally strengthened but less physically invigorated. I also remember that Lionel first formulated the concept of magic with reference to cultural astronomy and wanted to publish in a peer review paper. This was not accepted. This was and is very surprising for me, since it is sufficiently well known that the modern natural sciences have their roots in a magical worldview, even if this was then implemented differently. I was particularly inspired by the fact that he recognized the core of the question of cultural astronomy, or in my view of cultural cosmology, in anthropology. After all, it is about the fact that we humans can determine our position in this cosmos again and again through the ages, and thus also learn something about ourselves. In his last public appearance at the European Society for the Role of Astronomy and Culture, SEAC, and I was the former president of SEAC, and I am vice president-elect of SEAC, he very impressively impressed upon all of us again to place even more emphasis on the central content of cultural astronomy in the future and to work on it out. This can also provide a perspective for future questions and answers about the role of humans on this blue planet Earth and in connection with cosmic events. Lionel was always open to even unusual interpretations. He insists on comprehensible argumentations that can be substantiated by scientifically collected and discussed facts. Impulsively, he pushes forward into the ramification of various trains of thought. He wants to approach a sense of man in his relationship to the cosmos, and in doing so, also touches on the ultimate questions about life and death, which accompany to us all and shape us as human beings. I also think he has made a good approach in the transdisciplinarity of our discipline of cultural astronomy. He approaches in phenomenology, in structuralism, mythology, an interplay with archaeoastronomy and anthropology. And he put all this together, crossing the disciplines. His extraordinary commitment to the considerations of the peculiarly human component as an essential feature of cultural astronomy is obvious. For him, the interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary methodology, in the sense of a pan-human project, offers the appropriate approach to the everlasting questions that characterizes the human being. What is it to be human? A particular pedagogical concern of Sims, of Lionel, is the implementation of contents and methods of cultural astronomy, such as anthropology, in educational programs, not only for students and experts, but also for everyone. And I'm coming from a German tradition of cultural anthropology also, and it was for me very astonishing to see the problems with crossing the disciplines in the UK and other countries. In this sense, Lionel, among other things, was responsible as a long-standing vice president of SEAC and head of the educational committee. In his pedagogical work for anthropology and cultural astronomy, he notes that the combination of scientific theory and practical fieldwork achieves the most tremendous success in understanding the issues. Now, to close, I say some words about my contribution to the volume. I wanted to extend a little bit the ideas of Lionel. I discussed a lot with him about the future of cultural astronomy, which I want to call cultural cosmology, because it has something to do with the place of humankind on the Earth and in the cosmos. And I developed some ideas about the range of topics, of methodology, about an integral methodology, combining several disciplines into a transdisciplinary approach. I especially focused on ecosystems, life conditions, life worlds, and anthropology. And I have also thinking about what is called the ontological turn. So the idea of the first perspective of human mind, so that human has a certain kind of approach to the world. And this I extended also to a future aspect of cultural astronomy concerning the blue marble of Earth and our today's problems of, again, combining ecology, myths, understanding, and our mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Oh, you're gone. Thank you, Michael.
8 o'clock.
It is 8 o'clock, but I think we only have one or two more people in the room. Is David Fisher here? Are you here, David? If you are, unmute yourself and say something. I can't see you on the list. If not, there's only one other person who actually contributed to the volume. That's Kim Malville. Kim, do you want to talk for 5 minutes maximum? Are you there?
Okay. 5 minutes. I remember my first encounter with Lionel was in Klaipeda, where we had I think that was his first SEAC meeting that we attended. But soon I found him to be a real a twin of mine, where we had been separated at birth in terms of our mutual interest in lunar standstills. I had discovered a lunar standstill in the American Southwest, a place called Chimney Rock, in 1988, where I had investigated two towers, and the possibility of the sun or moon coming up between those towers. In the summer of 1988, I was actually hoping that I would find it to be the sun rather than the moon, because the moon, as you know, has been involved in a fair amount of controversy involving both Lionel and other people in archaeoastronomy. Turned out it was not the sun, but it was the moon. Just by chance, the moon appears between two chimneys as viewed from a very remote Chaco great house in southern Colorado. There's these two beautiful towers, and at the time of a major lunar standstill, the moon rises between those two towers. What got me most fascinated, found most fascinating, was that the local, the Native American, Ancestral American, and Native American belief at the local pueblo of Taos was that these two towers represented the divine twins, or the twin war gods of the pueblos, and one's the interpretation of the appearance of the moon between these two towers was, I think, the appearance of a god, namely the moon god, between these two towers representing gods of the ancestral pueblo. And it was a classic, as I thought, hierophany or theophany that would be immediately of extraordinary power for the ancestral pueblos living in the area at that time. And so when I discovered that the moonrise between the two chimneys, turned out that during the two times when the pueblo had been built, which was in 1076 and 1093, we had tree ring dates for those, for the dates at which the pueblo was built and then rebuilt. That was exactly the time of major lunar standstill. So I became a lunar standstill fan, just like Lionel. I found him great fun, great, a person of, as you all know him, of tremendous energy. And at meetings of SEAC in Alexandria, Athens, Rome, and Malta, he was a fabulous companion to argue with and discuss the various papers and ideas that were presented at those meetings. On a very personal note, he was really in love with his daughter, a young girl who he was teaching how to cook. And he would, at these meetings, go on with great relish and fondness about his experiences with his daughter. And I found that so compelling that I wished I had one myself, just like that. I never proposed that to my wife, that we should have a new child. It was one of these desires and wishes that was never discussed in our family, because we already have two daughters several years ago. But anyhow, it was so much fun to hear Lionel talking about teaching his daughter how to cook. In the other issue that Lionel and I shared in terms of lunar standstill was interpretation of various sites in the American Southwest, in Chaco Canyon in particular, and our discovery of a very large spiral in Chaco that marked June solstice. But it also marked a period of time 2 weeks ahead of solstice and 2 weeks after solstice, which I interpreted as identifying a lunar month lying around solstice, such that the first moon, full moon or new moon during that period of time would have been the time for a major festival based upon the Zuni organization of festival events. Namely, the Zuni, in sort of a variation upon the solarization of the moon, the Zuni believed in a balance between everything in the world, but between the sun and the moon. And at summer solstice, when the sun is highest in the sky, they chose to have a balance between a weak moon and a powerful sun at summer. And the time when the weak moon appeared closest to June solstice was the time for the festival. Well, the weak moon is, of course, the dark moon, which is a fond apparition of the moon by Lionel. And so the Zuni, unable to see the new moon itself, would look for the very first slender, beautiful crescent of the moon appearing above the western horizon. The first event of those around solstice would be the time for a major event of the Zunis at summer solstice. And at winter solstice, one had to combine a weak sun, namely low in the horizon, and a time when snow lay on the ground and the days were short and cold, with a powerful moon, namely the full moon, so that one had a solarization of the moon in a sense. Namely, the moon was the prominent object at the time of winter solstice, and the major festivals were held at the time of full moon closest to June solstice. And that is sort of the basis of the ideas of the paper that I included in the volume. And I think maybe I've had my 5 minutes. How's that, Fabio?
That was good. I think it was a bit more than 5 minutes, but that's all right. So I think we forgot to say, for the people in the room here, we are selling the book. There's only that many copies. It's discounted. It's £30 as opposed to 45. So if you want to do that, grab a copy before you leave. But I don't know, do we have time for maybe some questions?
Depends what we like to do. I mean, just can we get a sort of feeling? I mean, normally we need to stop now, but I mean, it's just so interesting. Perhaps you would let us stay on for another 20 minutes till 12:30. Yeah. If anyone needs to walk out, there's the time to do it. But it's great that you're all staying here. Let's stay until 8:30.
Okay.
Yeah.
But then call it 20 past.
20 past.
20 past.
Right.
Okay.
20 past 8. I'll be very strict. I've got to watch it.
Yeah, let's go with questions. Let's open the floor to questions, either on Zoom or people here.
Should we get the gallery back up?
Yes.
So we can see.
Can I do that? Yes, gallery.
Just to say, just one little point, obviously, is that the hunter-gatherer idea is that the moon is woman's biggest husband and comes down to Earth, and the reason you menstruate is because the moon is having sex with you. So it's just like the fact that you can't see the moon means that it's all the more powerful, because no signal is more powerful than the signal of blood in women. It's absolutely the most possible thing connected to the blood of animals. And so this whole idea of dark moon, just as we've been hearing, the idea that the moon is powerful when it's full, the the full moon is a time for honeymoon, for sex, for enjoyment and stuff, for relaxing of all the taboos. The dark moon is a really ritually powerful moment. And in my theory, of course, it's not an accident that the human female menstrual cycle is, guess what, on average length, 29.5 days, precisely the time it takes for the moon to pass through its phases as seen from the Earth. And so synchrony with the moon, either to some extent biological synchrony, but we're not, cultural efforts to make it appear that you're synchronizing was critical to the original situation from which all this derives. But the shamans would have been saying in buildings something like Stonehenge, give me the darkest night there ever was. Because it's only the dark, when the moon's dark, that you can of course see the Milky Way, as you're pointing out, and see the stars, see the constellations. So it's like, let there be darkness was the original sort of motto, not the constant, let there be light that we keep hearing from all these patriarchal religions. Darkness is a critical time for communing with the spirits, for communing with each other, and as we heard earlier, as Ian was pointing out, with the Hadza, as with other hunter-gatherers, the time of the dark moon is when you have your most powerful ritual. That's the time of the moon. Is the reason it's not in the sky is because it's down on Earth doing its business with women.
Amanda and Nick raise their hand on Zoom. And,
Hi there, everybody. Yeah, I've got three questions. One, can I have a copy of the book, please, even though I'm on Zoom? Two, is the I remember last time I heard Lionel speak, which was quite a few years ago now, he was talking in great detail about Hawthorne as the hinge, and he'd actually developed, I think, for Avebury a full mythology. And I was wondering if he actually published that, because I'd be really interested in seeing that paper if he did publish that. And another question about the fact that around the equator, the closer you are to the equator, the less the sun, the smaller the angle of your kind of butterfly diagram that you were talking about, Fabio. And in that case, there would be far more variation between where the moon is setting, whether it's a minor standstill or a major standstill, and where the sun is setting and rising. And so I'm wondering what the implications of that are for what you would actually expect to find in alignments, and whether that bears out, if that makes sense.
shall I answer all three questions? The first one is, yes, you can have a book. We'll put one aside for you. The second question, I completely forgot. Hawthorne. Yes, it is published. It is published. I can't, off the top of my head, remember where. Do you, John? Or you, Liz?
No.
But I chased that up, and I can get that information to you, Amanda.
That would be brilliant, yeah.
And the third question about going down to the equator and the range of the sun diminishing. The thing is, the range of the moon also diminishes. Those extremes are always going to be, I'm going to say this very roughly, 5 degrees away from the ranges of the sun. So as the range of the sun decreases as you approach the equator, the moon will also decrease. So the difference is always going to be about 5 degrees. It's not exactly 5 degrees.
Okay, thank you. That serves me right for being smart, huh?
Yeah, fair enough. I was just going to say, the further north you go in the northern hemisphere, obviously the ranges increase until you get to the Arctic, when the sun can just stay in the sky, and therefore the full moon can also stay in the sky, and the dark moon can stay in the sky.
Great, thanks
Right.
very much. Great.
That's all right. Thank you, Amanda. John, you also raised your hand. We can't hear you.
Firstly, I'd like to say that for a tribute for someone for whom the dark moon was so important, it's a nice coincidence that we've had an eclipse today, because on a day of an eclipse, of course, you can see the dark moon.
It was planned.
It was organized.
It was destined.
Well, very nice. I'd like to say that the inspiring thing about Lionel's theories, for me at least, there were two aspects to it. One was looking at what was hidden. So when you looked at a site, you tried to work out not only what was shown, but what was removed from sight. And I found that to be a very illuminating train of thought. I'm not sure. And the other thing that I hugely admired about Lionel's theory was that it was a circus theory. His vision of Stonehenge had a lot more in common with a fairground and a lot less in common with people dressed in sheets with so I like the fairground aspect to his interpretation of sites. It was always to do with power relations. I mean, indeed, there was he interpreted them in a political way. So he saw the power relations involved in the creation and then the celebration of these structures. There are certain things I never quite worked out with him. And one was there really a true coincidence between the solstice and the phase of the moon? Was this more than a poetic truth, an anthropological truth? Was it also an astronomical truth? And I mean, I'm still not entirely happy about that. I see it, though, as being a great anthropological truth. So in a way, I saw it as a great act of myth-making. His interpretation of Avebury was an act of myth-making. His interpretation of Stonehenge, same thing. Have one or two doubts about that one, but his Avebury circus theory, absolutely beautiful. Well done. Thank you, Lon.
Thank you, John, for those comments. I forgot what I was going to say originally, but your last point about myth-making, all interpretations of prehistoric sites are in effect an act of myth-making, isn't it? The question is, what is the evidence, and what is the evidence saying, and are we making myths that are getting closer and closer to what the evidence is telling us? And that's a big issue. So I'll just leave it there. You did raise an interesting point that I myself have been contending with respect to this correlation between the dark moon and the winter solstice. Because Lionel based this on those graphs that I showed you, which was in a publication from the 1980s by Morrison that Lionel was very fond of and published the modern commentary in the Journal of Skyscape Archaeology. And the question is whether that same logic has astronomical truth going into the long term, because it seems to apply, at least for those years that Morrison has published in, but would that apply when you go far back into prehistory, when actually the sun and the moon are not exactly in the same position where they were? And that's something that I'm actually currently exploring. And I will let everyone know what I find when I finish that. I don't,
the right answer.
I better come up with the right answer. I'm being told here from the right. We'll see. But you're absolutely right with what you said earlier on about Lionel focusing on what's not there. Sort of ontology of the negative, which is something that Rosalind, Lionel, and myself came up with in a conversation in a SIAC meeting back in Gilching, actually, the one that Michael organized. Ontology of the negative. So what's not there is sometimes more important than what's there, and that's really the dark moon, isn't it? It's just an extension of that concept. And one of the things I didn't mention and should have is that Lionel was obsessed with anomalies. He would sometimes look at the archaeological record for a particular site and he would pinpoint something that is anomalous that no archaeologist has managed to explain. And that would be the key that would eventually unravel the whole site for him. And that's, again, that's rare, particularly in archaeoastronomy, but in archaeology in general, people tend to go for the pattern, the thing that explains a lot of the site, not the thing that cannot be explained right now with current theories. And actually, I think that he was right. When one needs to focus on these anomalies, it's the anomaly that is going to unravel what we cannot currently see, but actually is there. And that's how I get into the ontological term, which I know Chris doesn't like, but it's that focus on the anomaly.
T.S. Kuhn's The Structure of Scientific Revolutions.
It is, yeah.
Particularly on knowing what how important an anomaly is, and how when apparently a trivial anomalous finding could completely explode the entire paradigm.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, I don't want to control the responses. You guys can say.
Well, any questions from the room, maybe? Anybody in the room? The room's very thoughtful. Any thoughts? Any more questions on Zoom?
Just say, I hadn't heard the standstill explained. Maybe I wasn't sufficiently attentive to Lionel when he was explaining it. I certainly made more sense of it this time than
you did better than
no, Fabio did a beautiful job.
I have the benefit of years of trying to explain this.
Yeah. Irene.
I think we've got somebody, by the way, David Fisher, that Fabio wants to.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Leonce, can you admit? Did I admit him?
Maybe I can do this here.
Oh, yeah.
It would be nice to hear from David, because Lionel works a lot with David. There he is. He's coming to us from the States, so the time zone may have.
Is he California? Is he West?
I don't know actually. He's not there. It's just a bookshop.
Where is he?
I think it's this one, connecting to audio.
Is it his dark moon phase?
It's another patriarchal takeover.
Yeah, go ahead while we're waiting for David.
Related to what John said about this kind of like circus aspects of how we think about sites like Silbury or Stonehenge. Someone expand on that for someone who is not familiar with any of this, like the shift between that and like the sheets that everyone is normally acting.
So one of you want to take that? Or it's not always me talking?
Well, maybe John would like to expand.
I didn't catch what the question was.
Well,
it was asking from the audience to expand the what you meant about Stonehenge being more like a circus or a fairground compared to the white sheets of the Druids. Say any more of what Lionel talked about?
Yes, it was the attempt to see Stonehenge as an active site in use, with processions approaching it, with palisades cutting off view, with sudden revelations. He saw it as being part of a power play by the people who used Stonehenge to impress people who came to visit. So it was a way of enforcing a social structure. So this was a very political view, and very illuminating and vivifying of how one sees Stonehenge.
If I can add to that, John, it's also how dynamic it was, because you kind of have this idea, which is the man with the white sheets, which is very based on Catholicism or Christianity. You know, you go there and you do this big ceremony and you're standing in this one place, which is the right place. And actually what Lionel had in mind was was a lot more like what you see in indigenous tribes, right? It's a lot more alive, and there's a lot going on, and there's music, and there's dancing, and you could see that in the Avery camp that Lionel participated in, and the samba groups that he was in. He reveled in that, and that was very much part of the way that he imagined Stonehenge and Avery to have been used.
Just to say, historically, just as the millennium was coming up, I joined a movement to reclaim the stones at Stonehenge, because during the miners' strike, there was a terrible incident where the Wiltshire police beat up a whole lot of travellers around midsummer to prevent it was called the Battle of the Beanfield. And I'd always thought, somehow or other we could turn the tables on that one. So I joined the Stonehenge campaign, and part of that was King Arthur, who I thought of as the drunken king. He was a completely anarchist, so-called druid, but at that particular moment he managed to sort of become the sort of chief druid, but he in no way was he somebody who was dressed up in boring white sheets. And anyway, we, as Fabio was mentioning, the samba band that earlier on we brought down from the Liverpool Dockers, the Liverpool School of Samba. We became the London School of Samba. We called Barking Batteria. Anyway, we actually see Stonehenge on the solstice of the millennium, so I don't know how to put it, but nobody had been allowed to celebrate anything. It's inside the stones for the previous, 15, 20 years. And we turned that right round, and we had an astonishing occasion. I just say, I just remember getting into the middle of Stonehenge, and we had this sort of what we call a break in samba. Suddenly all the drums are completely silent. And I remember King Arthur's voice. All around ye, see these stones. These stones are ours. Never let the bastards take them from you. We had a symbolic moment of really genuinely reclaiming the stones, and it was an occasion of huge amount of sort of rebellion and laughter and as well as reverence. One of the things that Lionel taught was, of course, Bakhtin's book on medieval carnival, turning the world upside down. And for a moment we'd sort of turned the world upside down using Stonehenge. Perhaps circus isn't quite the right term, but it was certainly an arena of sort of political overthrow and rebellion, and kind of symbolically turning the world upside down, even if only for one night.
Thanks, Chris. Can we hear from David Fisher?
David's there.
David, I noticed you joined us.
And there's a question back. Where's the question at the back?
Yes, I am. How are you doing?
Good. How are you doing?
Oh, surviving.
Sounds dreadful. David, do you want to, no, how do I do this? Sorry, let's leave it in the gallery. Do you want to share with us some of your thoughts with working with Lionel and your contribution to the volume as well, which is very much coming out of that, isn't it?
It is. In fact, that's, I worked with Lionel on 2 papers. I led one, he led the other. And in fact, there was a second one, was a spin-off of one we did jointly, which he concentrated on mainly. I guess my experience with Lionel was, I wouldn't want to say he gets wrapped around an axle when he's into a particular topic or subject area, but he attacks it like a terrier. And when I was working with him, if there was any deviation or thoughts of another, in fact, the thought I came up with is what's in my chapter in the book. But he did not want to incorporate that at all. It's all right. I just looked strangely off screen somehow. Now, I should have put my Stonehenge background up there for you, seeing as the subject of talk then. No, one of the things that he really wanted me to do for him was to do a march, an animated march from the King's Barrows down to the base of the avenue and then where he wanted me to build the palisade for him in that model, and then up the other side. Well, one of the things I did on that march in the animation I first shared with him was to put a drum beat in it. And he was not impressed whatsoever with that drum beat. And since then, I learned of Lionel's involvement with the Samba drum group. And I only wish that he had actually submitted, he told me about that, and he could put one of his own drum beats in it. But no, for him, it was distracting from the visual effects and any kind of dialogue that he might have in the presentation that we made jointly at SEAC. I think that was in Bath. And so, yes, Lionel, as I say, is a stickler for the detail that he wanted to present and didn't want to have any deviations from it. So there's a way that I've combined both my experience with Lionel and putting the document and the text together in the current publication. What else?
That's all right.
Yep, no, there we go.
Great. We're probably
Yeah,
gonna
we
need
do
to
need to wrap
soon
up.
wind up.
Of course.
There was in the chat, Ari Belensky was asking what Lionel added to Alexander Thom regarding Stonehenge. That's a rather big question.
Yeah,
Perhaps it's
his
too big
entire
a
explanation
question.
of Stonehenge is completely new from Tom. So
Yeah.
I think that requires a talk just for that, really.
Yeah, if anyone's willing to do it. But, yeah. And Tan, did you have a question?
Yeah, because he raised his hand.
You did raise your hand, but
I did, but I put it back down again. It's probably a bit hard to go into now. I just wondered, it was about what he did on Stonehenge, and then that guy was talking about these two chimneys elsewhere, because I wondered how much this went on elsewhere that's known. Stonehenge and this period, Avebury, were they the most advanced that were going on, or is there evidence of this solarization of the moon in regards to other countries and other parts of the world?
I can give a quick answer to that. That is the $1 million question, isn't it? That's why we need to train people to actually look at these things in other places. But I vividly remember it being in Alexandria, 2009, for the SEAC conference with Lionel, where I met Kim, and I think that's where Kim said he met Lionel. And going to see some sites, I can't remember what it was at the moment, but they had depictions of the sun and the moon, and these were like classical period sites, not ancient Egyptian sites. And Lionel coming out, and he was already interpreting, and he was already trying to explain the symbolism of the site using the model. So I think that Lionel will very much say that yes, this solarization of the moon would have happened in lots of places, maybe at different time periods, maybe in different ways, through different means. But someone needs to do that research. You know, Lionel did not have enough time to do all of that.
Yeah.
I think we and Rag should congratulate the two editors for this fantastic and for getting all of us together and for making this celebration such a brilliant brilliant event. But, well, just to say,
thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you, Fabio.
Thank you.
Thank you to everybody on Zoom. Thank you, Fabio. Thank you, Liz, for the contributions. Thank you, Michael. It was wonderful to hear from you, and Dave as well, and Kim, and everybody on Zoom. So we're going to, I'm just going to mention next week, which is again back to evolution. We are going to have our regular RAG talk from Chris Stringer, who's obviously very much in the news at the moment with the populations of the UK being found to have two distinct genetic origins for the Paleolithic, which is all very big news at the moment. But he will be talking, Chris Stringer will be talking about Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, and Denisovans, and there's nobody on the planet who can sort that out better than he can. So I hope you'll be able to join us next week. for that, whether you're on Zoom or whether come live, because we're very happy to have Chris back speaking live again. So look forward to it. I'm going to end the Zoom for now, and thank you very